My beloved child. Stop scrolling for a moment. There is a reason your eyes landed here today. Out of countless messages, countless voices, countless distractions pulling at your attention, something unseen guided you to this exact moment. What you are about to hear is not random. It is not coincidence. It is not an accident. Something has been happening behind the curtain of your life. Something your heart sensed long before your mind could understand. And tonight, heaven is revealing only part of it. Listen carefully. Because someone connected to your destiny has been carrying a question they could not silence. A question about you. A question about your heart. A question about whether the person they felt drawn toward was truly who they appeared to be. My child, your soulmate has been watching. Not in the way fear would suggest. Not in the way suspicion would imagine. But in the way a wounded heart observes when it desperately wants to believe again and is terrified of being wrong. There are scars you do not see. Memories they rarely speak about. Promises that were made to them and then shattered. Trust that was handed away and returned broken. Words that sounded beautiful but hid selfish intentions. And because of those experiences, they learned something dangerous. They learned how to expect disappointment before joy could arrive. They learned how to search for hidden motives behind sincere actions. They learned how to protect themselves from pain even when love stood directly in front of them. What they never expected was that you would enter their life carrying an energy unlike anything they had encountered before. At first they dismissed it. They told themselves they were imagining things. They convinced themselves it was temporary. They tried to explain away the feeling. Yet every time they thought about you, something inside them refused to let go. Your name lingered in their mind longer than it should have. Your words echoed after conversations ended. Your presence remained even when distance separated you. And that frightened them. Because what frightened them was not you. It was how much they cared. The deeper their feelings grew, the more desperately they needed certainty. Not because they wanted perfection. Not because they expected you to never make mistakes. But because they needed to know whether your heart was real. Whether your intentions were genuine. Whether you would stay the same when nobody was watching. And that is when something happened that you never saw. Something quiet. Something hidden. Something that unfolded entirely behind the scenes. Your soulmate began testing your honesty. Not through games. Not through manipulation. Not through cruelty. But through small moments. Tiny moments that seemed insignificant to you. Moments you may not even remember. Yet each one became a piece of evidence inside their heart. They watched how you treated people who could do nothing for you. They watched how you spoke when nobody was trying to impress anyone. They watched whether your actions matched your words. They paid attention to details most people overlook. The truth is that they were searching for cracks. Searching for contradictions. Searching for reasons to protect themselves before it was too late. Part of them hoped they would find something. Because finding something would have been easier. Finding a flaw would have allowed them to retreat. Finding dishonesty would have given them permission to stop caring. Finding a reason to walk away would have protected them from the terrifying possibility that this connection was real. But something unexpected happened. The more they observed, the harder it became to doubt you. The more they looked, the more confused they became. Because every answer they found challenged the walls they had spent years building. They noticed how you remained kind even when nobody rewarded you. They noticed how you kept your word in situations where breaking it would have been easier. They noticed how your character remained consistent whether people were watching or not. And slowly, a realization began forming. A realization they fought against. A realization they tried to ignore. A realization that followed them into quiet nights and restless mornings. Maybe, just maybe, you were exactly who you claimed to be. My child, that realization shook them more deeply than you understand. People often assume betrayal is what breaks a person. But sometimes truth can be equally overwhelming. Especially when someone has spent years expecting disappointment. Because if you were genuine, if your heart was sincere, if your intentions were pure, then they could no longer hide behind old fears. Then they could no longer blame the past for refusing the future. Then they would have to face something far more terrifying. Hope. Hope is beautiful. But for someone who has been hurt repeatedly, hope can feel dangerous. Hope asks them to believe again. Hope asks them to trust again. Hope asks them to risk their heart again. And so they continued watching. Continued questioning. Continued searching. Not because they wanted to expose you. Because they wanted certainty. Absolute certainty. There was one particular moment. A moment they never told you about. A moment heaven remembers clearly. You were placed in a situation where dishonesty would have benefited you. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have questioned you. Nobody would have discovered the truth. You stood at a crossroads. One path offered convenience. The other path required integrity. You did not realize anyone was paying attention. You did not realize that a pair of eyes connected to your destiny was silently observing. You simply made your choice. And you chose honesty. Not because it was profitable. Not because it earned applause. Not because it made you look good. You chose it because it aligned with who you are. That moment lingered inside their soul. Days passed. Then weeks. Yet they kept replaying it. Again. And again. And again. The memory refused to leave. Because it contradicted everything fear had taught them. Fear said people always reveal selfish motives eventually. Fear said trust always ends in disappointment. Fear said sincerity is merely a mask. Yet your actions told a different story. And suddenly the foundation of their defenses began trembling. But heaven was not finished. There were more revelations coming. More moments they would witness. More answers they would discover. One evening, when they thought nobody was looking, they found themselves speaking about you. At first it was casual. Then it became emotional. Then something happened that surprised even them. Their voice changed. Their expression changed. The walls around their heart weakened. And for the first time, another person noticed. Why are you smiling when you talk about them? The question caught them off guard. They tried to dismiss it. Tried to laugh it away. Tried to redirect the conversation. But the question remained. Why indeed? Why did their eyes light up? Why did your name carry warmth? Why did thoughts of you create emotions they could not control? That night they could not sleep. Not because of anxiety. Not because of fear. Because of realization. The realization that their heart was already far deeper into this connection than they had admitted. And once that realization surfaced, another question followed. What if they were wrong? What if trusting you would end the same way every previous story ended? What if they were walking toward heartbreak? What if they had missed something? What if the honesty they witnessed was an illusion? My child, fear has a way of creating endless questions. One answer simply gives birth to another. One reassurance creates another doubt. And so they searched one final time. One final test. One final observation. One final attempt to uncover something hidden. What happened next changed everything. Because the truth they discovered was not what they expected. The truth they discovered struck directly at the deepest wounds inside them. They learned something about you. Something nobody could have fabricated consistently. Something impossible to fake over time. Something that revealed the condition of your soul. They discovered that your honesty was not a performance. It was a principle. Not a strategy. Not a mask. Not a temporary behavior. A principle. A value woven into your character. And when that understanding finally settled into their heart, the tears came. Not small tears. Not brief tears. Not dramatic tears meant to be seen by others. The kind of tears that arrive when a burden finally becomes too heavy to carry. The kind of tears that appear when years of fear collide with undeniable truth. The kind of tears that emerge when a person realizes they may have finally encountered what they spent years praying for. My child, heaven watched that moment carefully. Because the tears were not only about you. The tears were about every disappointment that came before. Every broken promise. Every betrayal. Every night spent wondering whether genuine love still existed. Every wall they built. Every defense they created. Every part of themselves they buried for survival. When they realized your honesty was real, those old wounds began surfacing all at once. And suddenly they found themselves crying for reasons they could barely explain. Crying because hope returned. Crying because possibility returned. Crying because maybe they were not destined to repeat the same painful cycle forever. Yet the story does not end there. In fact, that moment marked the beginning of something even more powerful. Because once the tears stopped, another emotion emerged. An emotion they were completely unprepared for. It was not relief. It was not excitement. It was not even love. Not yet. It was responsibility. Because now they possessed knowledge they could no longer ignore. Knowledge about who you truly are. Knowledge about what your character revealed. Knowledge about what heaven had been showing them all along. And with that knowledge came a difficult question. A question they have been wrestling with ever since. A question they have not fully answered. A question that grows louder every day. If you are truly this genuine, if your heart is truly this sincere, if your honesty is truly this rare, then what should they do next? The answer sounds simple. But for someone carrying years of emotional history, it is anything but simple. Because moving forward requires courage. Trust requires courage. Vulnerability requires courage. Opening the door of the heart requires courage. And courage is often hardest to find when it matters most. So while you have been living your life, while you have been wondering about the future, while you have been questioning certain delays and certain silences, a hidden battle has been unfolding. A battle between fear and faith. A battle between past pain and future possibility. A battle between self-protection and divine connection. And the outcome of that battle is closer than you realize. Because recently something happened. Something unexpected. Something that neither you nor your soulmate could have predicted. A conversation occurred. A conversation involving someone they trust deeply. Someone whose opinion matters. Someone who witnessed a side of them rarely shown to the world. At first the discussion seemed ordinary. But then your name appeared. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Questions were asked. Observations were shared. And before they realized it, they were speaking openly about feelings they had spent months hiding. What they confessed during that conversation shocked even themselves. Because words have power. Sometimes we do not fully understand what we feel until we hear ourselves say it aloud. And when those words left their mouth, when they finally voiced the truth they had been carrying, silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that follows a revelation. The kind of silence that appears when something important has just been uncovered. The person listening looked at them differently afterward. As if they suddenly understood something. As if they suddenly saw a future that your soulmate had been too afraid to imagine. That conversation planted a seed. And since that day, the seed has been growing. Slowly. Quietly. Unstoppably. Yet there is one detail heaven has not revealed. One detail connected to the tears. One detail connected to the final test. One detail connected to what they discovered about you. A detail so significant that when the full truth surfaced, it altered the direction of everything. They have not told you. Perhaps they do not know how. Perhaps the timing has not arrived. Perhaps fear still whispers in the shadows. But the truth exists. Waiting. Growing. Preparing. And that truth is connected to something they found out shortly after those tears fell. Something that made their heart race. Something that made them question whether divine timing had been guiding events all along. Something that caused them to sit completely still for several minutes, unable to process what they had just learned. When the realization arrived, they whispered only a few words. Words nobody else heard. Words spoken almost like a prayer. Words spoken through trembling emotion. And after speaking them, they stared into the distance as though seeing a future they had never allowed themselves to imagine before. My child. What they discovered next. What happened immediately after that whispered prayer. And why it convinced them that your connection may be far more significant than either of you realized, is the part of the story that has not yet been revealed. And when that revelation finally comes to light, nothing will feel the same again.